unique show on today's episode as I want to run through the Falcons' top 5 fantasy football targets and kind of go through the value, the guys to take, maybe the guys to pass on. And I think you'll find this video to be very informative. If you don't play fantasy football, I still think there's a lot of really good insight in today's episode about learning about Cousins, Robinson, the receivers, Kyle Pitts, all that good stuff. So hope you guys sit back, relax, and enjoy. Now, I will open up by saying my rule when it comes to fantasy football is do you. Like, fantasy football is supposed to be fun. So if your gut tells you that Kyle Pitts is going to have a monster year, don't listen to what 10 websites tell you. Like, go pick the guy you want to pick. But if you like to outsource your information and listen to others because you don't really have time to keep up with football, but you just want to play it along because you've been in the same league with all your friends for a decade, then yeah, you're more than welcome to mooch off of what I have to offer. But no one's going to say anything that's going to be 100% correct. There is a lot of luck incorporated into fantasy football, but most importantly, do you listen to your gut? I think that's the best way to play. But let's start off with quarterback Kirk Cousins, who is hopefully going to have a big year for the Falcons, of course. However, the fantasy football gods do not think that's going to be the case. In fact, if you go off of ADP, which is average draft position, amongst all quarterbacks, he is the 19th quarterback going. Now, when it comes to ADP and some of these rankings, I went with half PPR, unless specifically noted otherwise. But 19 definitely feels low. We're talking about a bottom half quarterback, and Kirk Cousins is not a bottom half quarterback, but fantasy can be different since rushing is so heavily incorporated, which is why you see Anthony Richardson so high, although I still think that's way too high for him. But here are Kirk Cousins' last fantasy rankings from the last couple of seasons. So weeks 1 through 8 before he went down in 2023, he was the 6th best fantasy football quarterback. So he was playing at the best level he has ever played from a fantasy perspective, and now he's supposed to be number 19. Something's not adding up to me. I know the injury, but guys bounce back from injuries all the time. These are like really good doctors. These are not Civil War doctors. I think they're going to be just fine getting Kirk Cousins back to where he was pre-injury. So if you are in the camp of, I don't like to take a quarterback early, I like to go after running backs and receivers, which is my train of thought, because the quarterback you take in round 2 and the receiver you take in round 10 versus flip-flopping that, the receiver you take in round 2 and the quarterback you take in round 10, I think the latter is going to get you more points because the separation in quarterbacks is very small. The separation in receivers can be very big. So if you like to let everyone else take a quarterback while you go get all the running backs and receivers and you want to wait, Kirk Cousins in round 12 or 13 sounds like an absolute steal to me. So I like the value for Kirk Cousins at 19 a lot. Moving on to Bijan Robinson. Now, very different story for him, right? Cousins is quarterback 19. He's going in the double-digit rounds. Meanwhile, Robinson is going in round 1 in pretty much every single mock draft you see, and even real drafts, as people criminally start those too early still. But Robinson, again, this is based off an average of a lot of different sites like Sleeper and CBS, but he is going on average number 3 amongst all running backs after Christian McCaffrey and Breece Hall, ahead of Saquon and Jonathan Taylor. Just on a side tangent here, I don't remember the last time the running back rankings or the running backs were this week in a fantasy football draft. But anyway, last year it was not as fruitful of a season for Robinson in fantasy as I would have thought and hoped. In standard scoring, he finished 14th. He did help a little bit more in the PPR leagues where he finished 12th in half PPR and full PPR. So a little bit better, but still, I think we could all agree that for where he was getting drafted last year, which was at the tail end of round 1, early round 2, the expectation was a lot higher than outside of the top 10. Now, if you look at history side of round 1 running backs in their second year in fantasy football, Najee Harris most recently going from 4th down to 14th from years 1 to year 2. We didn't get to see Travis Etienne at all in his rookie season. In his first year, but kind of his second year at the same time, he finished 17th. CEH fell a ton. Josh Jacobs, though, proving to be a little bit of a difference maker. He went from 18th to 8th. Barkley got injured. He fell from 2nd to 10th. Penny sucked. Sony Michel stunk. Leonard Fournette, he fell a ton, 88th to 40th. Christian McCaffrey is like him and Josh Jacobs are the only outliers in a positive way. He went from 11th as a rookie to 3rd in his sophomore season. So if you're thinking he has to be better, it's his second year. History says not necessarily. So don't use that argument if you're trying to justify Bijan going 3rd or 4th in your league. Now, what you can look to is where the Falcons coaching staff comes from, which is predominantly the LA Rams, where they had Kyren Williams last season. Now, he was injured for the middle third of the year, but I mean, look at the way he ended the year. And by the way, by year, I only mean through week 17. No fantasy football league should go to the last week of the regular season. So I always go to week 17 or week 16 when we're talking about a 17-week schedule. But Kyren Williams, amongst all running backs last year, weeks 12 through 17, a pretty good sample size, was second, 688 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns. So clearly the Rams coaching staff was pushing the right buttons to get Kyren in the fantasy football gods' good graces. Now, the Falcons, as you have probably heard me complain about a lot, I don't believe have a lot of receiving depth. So for that reason, they're probably going to outsource a good amount of the targets and the throws to Bijan Robinson. Now, they did say earlier that Robinson's going to be a runner, which is still good to hear from a fantasy perspective, but I think that the lack of receiving depth and Robinson being a very good receiving running back should bode well for fantasy football owners. I'm not quite convinced that he's going to be the 6th best player in fantasy football this year just because of how pass happy this offense should be with Kirk Cousins, Drake London, and Darnell Mooney, and then where the coaching staffs come from in LA, Cousins coming down from Minnesota. But I still think Robinson's going to be a good player. I don't know if he's going to be good enough for me to use the 5th overall pick on. And that's sounding like negative, but I think he's going to land ultimately somewhere in that 8 to 14 range. And that's still going to be a good pick for someone, but I think there's probably a better option at pick number 4 or pick number 5, which is about where he's going right now. Now, before we look at the other players on the Falcons roster, today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. That's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. I'm talking turning $10 into $1,000. Prize Picks has so many cool promotions. Like on Fridays, for example, you can get your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup. Now, I love playing Prize Picks with my fiance because she's not a very big sports fan. But if we get together a Prize Picks lineup, man, all of a sudden she's engaged for all 4 quarters. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy at Prize Picks. Let's lump these next 2 together here, Drake London, and then we'll put Darnell Mooney in as well and just talk about both receivers for a moment. Very different ends of the spectrum for the fantasy football rankings at the moment. Drake London projected to be a top 15 receiver. Darnell Mooney not in that same category. London comes off a 905-yard season, but remember who he was working with, right? He had back-to-back seasons of Mariota, Desmond Ridder, and Taylor Heineke. It's honestly impressive the numbers he did put up with those guys. Darnell Mooney, on the other hand, he comes off a down year with the Bears, 414 yards, 1 touchdown. Just couldn't quite pick up where he left off in that breakout sophomore campaign. Now, here are the ADPs for these 2 receivers, along with the top 8 guys. So Drake London going 12th in most fantasy football drafts for wide receivers, 20th overall. But Darnell Mooney going all the way at 175 overall, 70th amongst wide receivers. So let's talk about Drake London first, and then we'll talk about Darnell Mooney. Because Drake London is a superstar. Well, he's a star wide receiver. Let's put it that way. I think there's a lot to like about Drake London as a player. And, of course, that's going to translate over to to fantasy football as well. But if you take a close look at Kirk Cousins' #1 wide receiver for as long as he's been a starting quarterback. Of course, having Justin Jefferson helps a ton because he's Justin Jefferson and he can do it all by himself pretty much. But Stephon Diggs in 2019, like he was 17th in a half PPR league. Adam Thielen, 6th in 2018. Jamison Crowder, 37th. Pierre Garçon, 31st and 38th. I mean, Thielen, Crowder, Garçon, all vastly overachieving where they were drafted and where they finished at the end of the season. So, safe to say that Kirk Cousins, when he's got a top guy, he can still get him a lot of touches, and he's not going to be some assassin for top receivers because of bad quarterback play. Whether it's fantasy football or just real football, I'm all in on Drake London this year. I feel like he's going to have a monster season. It's been brewing for the last 2 years. His catch radius is insane. He's got excellent size for his style of play with great speed to go along with it. So I think Drake London's going to be a no-doubter, surefire thing in fantasy this year. I don't know if he's going to be as good as like what Jefferson, Hill, and Chase are at when they're at their top game, but I feel like his floor is super high as well, and he's going to be a can't-miss guy for someone in round 2. So if you're looking to play it safe and take your favorite player on the Falcons maybe in round 2, Drake London is going to be an excellent pick. Now let's talk about Darnell Mooney, who's not as popular as the other guys we talked about so far. And I understand too, right? Last year, he was 82nd amongst receivers, 74th the year before that. But that 2021 season, his second year with the Bears, 24th, just vastly outkicking where he was supposed to finish. So let's take a look at Kirk Cousins' number 2 receivers in fantasy football the last 5 years, because that's what Darnell Mooney will be. His number 2. Is Cousins someone that only looks at his top guy? Not really. I mean, look at last season. If you look at just Kirk Cousins and Jordan Addison weeks 1 through 8 before Kirk Cousins went down with an injury, 28th. Not too shabby for a number 2. Don't you agree? Adam Thielen, 33rd, 23rd, 8th, 61st. Like, there's a lot of good work right here being done by Kirk Cousins' number 2 guy who, listen, I'm not saying that he's going to have 2 receivers in the top 15, but if you're in a 10-man league and everyone has 2 starting wide receivers, like the top 20 right there should be all starters. And for Jordan Addison to be 28th as a number 2 on a team, yeah, I think you're getting really good value as Darnell Mooney being the number 2 in Atlanta. I think Darnell Mooney is going to be a top 50 fantasy football receiver this year. He's going 70th right now. I'm not even just going to put out a soft, he could be top 60 or top 65. No, I think he is going to dramatically overachieve the expectations laid out for him and be a top 50 fantasy football receiver this year. And you're finding him at the very end of all of your fantasy drafts. I think Darnell Mooney is a great receiver to pounce on in round 14, like just when you're about to start mentally checking out because kickers and defenses are starting to go and you're like, never heard of this guy, didn't know he was still in the league. Darnell Mooney staring at you in the face. You should take him. The value, I think, is way too good based on where all of Kirk Cousins' number 2 receivers have finished. Darnell Mooney showed his abilities in 2020 and 2021. To me, this one just makes too much sense. And then finally, we have Kyle Pitts, tight end who has burned a lot of bridges with fantasy football owners. And I understand why you might be hesitant to trust Kyle Pitts again. Sorry if you hear screaming in the background. That's our Steelers show getting a big super chat in. But anywho, let's look at the tight end average draft position because Kyle Pitts is going 7th in the league, 62 overall, which sounds pretty fair. Like, Kelsey's Kelsey, although I think he's kind of slowing down. Sam Laporta is going to be the number 1 tight end in fantasy football this season. I wish that word was not out on Trey McBride. He's my sleeper, but it's not even a sleeper when you're the 3rd tight end going. Don't really understand why Kittle is so far down, but we're kind of getting too much in the weeds of tight end fantasy football talk here. This has to be the year for Kyle Pitts, right? Like, all of the preseason hype and smoke and, removed from that knee surgery in 2021, 2022, I wouldn't say it was a lost season, but, suboptimal quarterback play. Although being the 4th overall pick, you should be someone that elevates your quarterback a little bit. But still, this has to be the year where Kyle Pitts really blossoms and shows what we saw in his rookie season. I mean, he has the NFL record for receiving yards by a rookie tight end with 1,026. But more importantly, the red zone touches must come alive. That was something that Arthur Smith failed at and Raheem Morris must execute at. But Kyle Pitts has drawn incredible reviews so far in the preseason, which it's the preseason. This happens every year. I'm guilty of it. We all have Groundhog Day where we feel like the preseason is going to translate to the regular season 100%. And then all of a sudden the stars come out because they didn't play in the preseason. And we are reminded, oh yeah, we probably overreacted to wide receiver 4 a little bit. Now, here's how I would rank the value of the 5 top players on the Falcons. Just value, meaning from where they're going and where they're going to finish, the biggest jump. I think Darnell Mooney, value-wise, is incredible. Like, he's not going to have better numbers than anyone else, but he's going to vastly exceed where he is supposed to finish in fantasy this year. I like Kyle Pitts a lot as well. I think for finding him in round 6, like, you could go with Drake London in round 2, but I wouldn't hate the combination of any other receiver in round 2 like Puka Nacua and then Kyle Pitts in round 6 versus Drake London in round 2, and then you're looking at like a Jake Ferguson or David Njoku in round 7 or 8. I think that first combination might be better. I like London a lot simply because he's going to be a surefire thing. Like, I think Drake London is destined to get to 1,200 yards and 7 to 8 touchdowns. I'd put it all on that. Bijan, I do like a lot. I just feel like going 5 overall for a running back that finished 10 through 12 last year is a little bit too risky of a bet for me to make, which is why I'd rather just err on the side of caution. I think he's going to be a solid player. I think he's going to be a really good player this year, but I think you might find something you're a bit more comfortable with early in round 1. And then finally, not that Kirk Cousins, I don't like the value at all. I actually like it a lot, but I like everyone's value here, so someone has to be 5. But I feel like the other ones, they might see a bigger jump in where they're going. Maybe you could flip-flop Bijan and Cousins, but I think Cousins is going to be Kirk Cousins. Like, he's probably going to finish that 9 to 12 range like he has in most of his career. So which player do you like the most that you want to draft in your fantasy draft? I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun making it. I don't know if producer Reed had a lot of fun building it because there were a lot of graphics today, but I did feel like this was a pretty fun, informative video to get everyone ready for their fantasy football drafts.